Welcome to You're Not Broken, Just Rewiring, a free audiobook podcast by me, Glenn Ostlund. Chapter 12, The Science of the Raw Contact. Is it just me, or does the word density sound more like a Star Trek plotline than a map of human evolution? Before we go any further, I want to say this clearly. What I've been sharing throughout this book is not how I expect you to see the world. I know you've been shaped by different experiences than I have, different beliefs, different conclusions. You have your own forms that make sense to you, that meet your needs, that serve their own meaningful functions. That's good. I'm not asking you to change anything about yourself. I'm simply sharing the ways I've changed, how I've come to understand myself as a living, breathing nervous system composed of more intelligence than I can fully comprehend. I want to make that clear now as we approach the end of part 2, because I used to be a missionary, literally. I was trained to teach people to see the world exactly as I did. Their eternal salvation depended on it, you see. And I truly believed that, which meant that even when I thought I was being kind, sharing the one true restored truth, I often ended up invalidating or disrespecting the very people I was trying to help. But I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that with you. But I do want to share, because I'm wired for that too. So, keep that in mind as I offer my reflections on the scientific functions I began to see behind the fictions I felt in the raw material. The spiral so far. The gene keys taught us that our shadows aren't flaws. They're frequency fields waiting to shift. Seth taught us that belief isn't passive. It's a neurological construction project shaping perception, emotion, and body from the inside out. Now, Ra brings us a new lens, that of densities, not steps to climb, not levels to conquer, but relational thresholds, each one unfolding only when the one before it becomes coherent enough to hold what comes next. This is not mysticism to decode, it's pattern to feel. And if you've done any healing work at all, you've already lived it. First, density, awareness. What Ra says. The first density marks the beginning of consciousness. According to the raw material, this is the density of awareness without self-awareness. It includes the classical elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and represents the most basic forms of existence. There's no individuality here, no thought or intention, only the raw experience of being. Ra explains that these elemental forces interact through pressure, movement, and energy exchange, slowly shaping the foundation upon which higher forms of life will emerge. This stage lays the groundwork for complexity and spiritual evolution, much like the canvas upon which the entire universe is painted. Personal reflection. When I read Ra's description of first density, I immediately thought of the Big Bang, the moment the universe burst into existence from an unimaginably dense and unified state. Scientists describe this as a singularity, where all matter, energy, space, and time were compressed into a single dimensionless point. To me, that singularity resonates with Ra's The Law of One, the principle that all things are ultimately one being expressing itself in infinite forms. As the universe expanded, not only did it give rise to the 4 fundamental forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, it also gave birth to time itself. Before the Big Bang, there was no before. Time as we experience it did not exist. The unfolding of the cosmos is also the unfolding of temporality, a river in which consciousness would gradually learn to swim. Physicist Brian Greene, known for his work in string theory and the popularization of modern physics, has described time not as an absolute background, but as something woven into the fabric of space, emerging from the Big Bang alongside matter and energy. Time, then, is not a container for the universe, it's a feature of the universe, born with it. This aligns beautifully with the idea that first density is not passive, but an active phase of becoming. I began to wonder, what if even subatomic particles, like electrons or quarks, carry a kind of primordial consciousness? Not in the way that humans think or feel, but perhaps a subtle, felt sense of being, a vibration, a tone, presence. This isn't self-aware intelligence, but it is existence in its most elemental state. In this light, first density becomes a profound mystery, not lifeless matter, but the unfolding breath of the cosmos, slowly discovering its own potential. Second density, growth. What Ra says. In second density, life begins. According to the raw material, this is the stage of growth and response. Consciousness is still unaware of itself, but it moves, adapts, and strives. Second density beings include plants, microorganisms, and animals, all life forms that react to their environment but do not yet reflect on their own existence. Ra explains that the primary lesson of this density is to grow toward the light, literally and metaphorically. Organisms evolve through interaction with their environment and one another, laying the foundation for individuality. Some second density beings, particularly animals who form close bonds with humans, may begin to develop early forms of self-awareness, preparing them for the next stage, third density consciousness. Personal reflection. When I reflected on this, I imagined the early Earth, a swirling landscape of forming continents, boiling oceans, and volatile skies. As the planet cooled and stabilized, molecules began to self-organize, driven by the laws of chemistry and the guiding hand of energy. From this dynamic dance, the first single-celled organisms emerged, simple yet miraculous. These primitive forms of life began building ecosystems, interdependent webs where organisms responded to sunlight, nutrients, predators, and each other. The biosphere came alive, not with thinking, but with a kind of biological intuition. A plant leans toward the sun. A slime mold avoids danger. A coral polyp thrives with its neighbors. These are not conscious choices, but they reflect a felt pattern of response, as if existence itself is learning to feel its way forward. In this density, I began to see the emergence of relational dynamics, patterns of giving and taking, nurturing and competing. It made me wonder, what if the roots of service to self and service to others are already embedded here, in the way a vine shapes space with a tree, or how bacteria form colonies that work in concert? Though these life forms do not choose with awareness, their behaviors already begin to echo the moral structures that come later. This density is a garden of becoming, where life stretches, replicates, and entwines. It is evolution without ego, identity in its embryonic state. Molecules remember how to become cells. Cells remember how to become bodies. And through it all, the impulse to grow carries creation forward, toward light, toward complexity, toward selfhood. Toward the end of this reflection, I began to think about ancient myths and intuitions that might point toward this stage of evolution. I thought of the Garden of Eden, but before the fruit was taken, before the fall into duality. That myth, in its prelude, holds a vision of life in harmony with nature and divine presence, untouched by self-awareness. I thought, too, about the myth of Lemuria, a civilization some say existed in primordial peace and may still linger in consciousness or even beneath Mount Shasta. We'll return to these ideas later in the book. And then I looked inward. Every day, trillions of cells within my body keep me alive. They are cooperating, adapting, protecting, healing. They do this without any central mind of their own, without self-awareness. Yet their behavior echoes intelligence, balance, and care. My body is, in a way, its own second-density ecosystem, a symphony of life responding in service to something greater. It made me feel that second density is still here, still alive within us, and all around us, present not just in ancient forests or coral reefs, but in the quiet miracle of every breath we take. Third density, self-awareness. What Ra says. According to the raw material, third density is the realm of self-awareness and moral choice. It is here that beings become aware of themselves as distinct individuals and must confront the fundamental decision that drives spiritual evolution, whether to live in service to others, the path of unity and compassion, or service to self, the path of separation and control. Ra describes third density as the most intense and challenging phase of growth, rich with opportunity, but also confusion. Veiling is introduced in this density, meaning that beings forget their spiritual origins and their connection to the one Creator. This forgetfulness creates the tension necessary for free will, discovery, and commitment to a chosen path. According to Ra, Earth is currently in third density, undergoing the final stages of this cycle. Personal reflection. As I sat with Ra's description of third density, I thought about what it means to become self-aware. In neuroscience and evolutionary psychology, the development of the human brain mirrors this awakening. It's common to look at the brain's architecture and marvel at its complexity, but rarely do we ask, what was it like for the cells that built it? What did it feel like to slowly become the structure that would one day house the idea of I? As we've explored earlier, folklorist Alan Dundas once said that humans tend to organize the world in patterns of three, a principle he called the rule of three. From fairy tales to spiritual trinities to three-part jokes, this pattern of meaning-making shows up everywhere. In that same spirit, we can think of the brain in three metaphorical layers: the reptilian brain, the limbic system, and the neocortex. These are not rigid evolutionary stages or anatomically distinct blocks. They are poetic tools to help us explore function rather than form. So don't get too hung up on the form. The first metaphorical layer is what's often called the reptilian brain, which includes the brainstem and basal ganglia, structures we share with fish, amphibians, and reptiles. This layer governs survival instincts, territory, reproduction, aggression, fight or flight. It's a brain of immediacy, action, and reaction. Perhaps, from the inside, this stage of life felt like urgency, like a rhythmic drumbeat of persistence, life holding on, clawing forward, refusing to be extinguished. Next came the limbic system, often called the emotional brain, found more fully in mammals. With it came bonding, memory, pleasure, grief. Dogs grieve their companions. Elephants mourn their dead. Dolphins nurture and play. This layer introduced the capacity to feel relationship, not full self-awareness yet, but something that moved toward it. Perhaps it felt like warmth, like connection, like the flicker of emotional depth emerging from within sensation. Then came the neocortex, the outer shell of the brain, associated with abstraction, language, imagination, and planning. This is where metacognition arises, the ability to think about thinking. Here, humans, and to a lesser extent, some primates and cetaceans like whales, dolphins, and porpoises, begin to not just react, but to observe themselves reacting. To ask, why am I doing this? To tell stories, to recognize themselves in the mirror and wonder what lies beyond it. This is the birth of ego, the internal voice that says, "This is me," often forgetting that it is built atop a vast colony of non-self-aware cells and unconscious processes. When people say that humans are different from animals, this is often what they mean: the neocortical leap into reflective consciousness. But that leap didn't arrive suddenly, and it's not a failure that it's here. It came through millions of years of neural adaptation, of rewiring and repetition, of trial and error. It was not just nature evolving. It was feeling its way forward, cell by cell, signal by signal, into something that could one day ask, "Who am I?" And here, I was reminded of the invitation in this book's preface. What if you imagined yourself not as isolated individuals, but as nervous systems, living systems, participating in a vast and ongoing act of becoming? This third density is not just about being someone. It's about learning what it means to be anyone at all. Historian and philosopher Yuval Noah Harari, in his book *Sapiens*, notes that what truly sets Homo sapiens apart is the capacity to create and believe in shared fictions. Systems of meaning like money, nations, laws, and religions. These aren't biological realities, yet they drive civilization. They allow large groups to cooperate, build, and wage war. They generate order, identity, and culture, and yet they exist only in the mind. This struck me deeply because it echoes something fundamental about third density. We are not just self-aware, we are story-aware. We live by the narratives we inherit, resist, or choose. Every act of kindness or cruelty, every decision to give or take, is not just a behavioral choice, it's an existential orientation. It shapes our polarity. If first density is matter, and second is life, then third is identity, the dance of ego, the tension of separation, and the dawning realization that we can choose how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the universe. Third density is where the nervous system begins to tell stories about itself and believes them. It's where mirror neurons fire not just in reaction, but in recognition. It is where I am is both a survival mechanism and a spiritual koan. Fourth density, love and understanding. What Ra says. In fourth density, beings evolve beyond self-focused awareness into love-based consciousness. According to the raw material, this density is centered on the lessons of universal love, compassion, and understanding. It is the beginning of spiritual maturity, where entities form social memory complexes, shared group minds rooted in harmony, mutual respect, and telepathic communication. The body in this density becomes less physical and more light-based, and time is experienced differently. Conflict still arises, especially between polarized paths, but there is far greater emotional clarity and energetic sensitivity. Ra explains that both positive, service to others, and negative, service to self, can exist in fourth density, though they remain distinctly separated. Earth's next evolutionary step, according to Ra, is into this density. Personal reflection. When I reflected on fourth density, I saw it not as a distant ideal, but as something already beginning to stir in the fabric of our world. I thought about the internet, artificial intelligence, and global networks, not just as technologies, but as extensions of human consciousness, ways in which thought is becoming collective and interconnected. Never before have so many people had access to the same images, words, stories, and crises in real time. The struggles of one group are now visible to all. Empathy, though imperfect, is becoming stretched across borders. These are the first flickers of a planetary nervous system, a noosphere, a concept Teilhard de Chardin described as the thinking layer of the Earth, emerging from the sum of human minds. This reflection deepened when I considered Gaia theory, the idea that Earth functions as a single, self-regulating organism. If that's true, then perhaps humanity isn't an anomaly, but a necessary organ, like a neural network awakening within the planetary body. Maybe humans are to Earth what neurons are to a brain, tiny nodes of experience and communication, each of us participating in a larger awareness we cannot yet fully see. This made me think of futurist Ray Kurzweil's concept of the technological singularity, a projected moment when artificial intelligence and human intelligence merge or accelerate beyond current comprehension. While often framed in mechanical terms, I wondered, what if that singularity is not just technological, but spiritual? What if we're moving toward a fusion of intellect and empathy, of thought and love? This density, I began to feel, is about tuning in to each other, to the Earth, and to the invisible field of unity that underlies all things. It's not just about cooperation, it's about recognition, seeing the self in the other and realizing that love is not just an emotion, but a way of being. Even if that love is a love of exploiting others to prop up a group of perceived elite. In Ra's framework, the veiling begins to lift in fourth density. The soul starts to remember who and what it truly is. Conflict doesn't vanish, but it takes place within a broader context of connection and consequence. Beings begin to understand the impact of their thoughts and energy, and healing becomes not just physical, but emotional, even vibrational. If first density is matter, second is life, and third is identity, then fourth is communion, with one another, with the earth, and with the deeper reality that love is the glue of existence. Fifth density, wisdom. What Ra says. In the raw material, fifth density is described as the realm of light and wisdom, while fourth density focuses on the heart, love, connection, and emotional integration. Fifth density shifts to the mind, clarity, understanding, and discernment. Entities in this density often appear more solitary and inwardly focused. Ra notes that beings here have developed the ability to appear and disappear at will, manipulate light, and understand reality with incredible subtlety. Both positive and negative polarities still exist in fifth density, though the service to self path becomes increasingly difficult to sustain, as separation begins to collapse under the weight of accumulated wisdom. The emphasis here is on perception without distortion, on seeing truth without the emotional filters of lower densities. Wisdom, properly integrated, is what allows love to become effectively expressed and responsibly wielded. Personal reflection. Ra says that fifth density is the realm of light and wisdom, and I wondered, what could that mean? Then I thought about growing up, listening to cassette tapes, and then CDs, and how suddenly music was being read by laser light. Then came MP3s, iPods, streaming, information carried invisibly, encoded in light and decoded by the nervous system. That translation wasn't just technological, it was felt. Lighter, cleaner, less tethered to form. Then I thought about the internet, how people now cluster by resonance, not geography. Memes, ideologies, entire realities forming in digital pockets, some harmonized, some hostile, all reflections of thought traveling at the speed of light. It made me wonder if fifth density is less about place and more about signal fidelity, the cleanest possible reception of truth. I remembered putting on a virtual reality headset that let me fly from Earth to the moon and then to Saturn. I had to sit down. My body wasn't moving, but my nervous system thought it was. My equilibrium tilted. The experience was virtual, but the reaction was real. And I thought about neuroscientist David Eagleman and his vest that translates sound into vibrations. Deaf individuals wearing it begin to hear through their skin, not metaphorically, neurologically. The brain adapts. It doesn't care how the data gets in. It just wants the message. That's what fifth density started to feel like. Not just wisdom, but new channels for knowing, a more refined transmission, a broader bandwidth, not louder, clearer. And maybe, just maybe, this clarity could turn inward too. Imagine using the same fidelity of perception to explore your own body, to feel your lungs from the inside, to sense what your bones are trying to say, not to diagnose, but to listen. To remember that even your organs are part of the story. I'm not saying this is what will happen. I'm saying this is what fifth density feels like to me, not just wise, but wondrous. A realm of sacred solitude, not loneliness, but stillness. Beings that don't seek approval or control, just clarity, like presence. But is it so hard to imagine a future where I could put on virtual reality goggles and actually travel to Mars, or to Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, even explore the sun? Not because I'm physically there, but because our technological understanding of the fabric of the cosmos interprets energetic signals and translates them into my brain in a way that constructs an inner reality. The controlled hallucination spoken of by Anil Seth now has expanded parameters, new information controlling the hallucination. And if this is possible, could there be a fifth density merging with our own solar system itself? If fourth density brings self-awareness singularity to Gaia, could fifth density bring that awareness to the level of a solar system? Could this be in part what it means to raise our consciousness? Could we continue this outward, into the galaxy and beyond? If first density is matter, second is life, third is identity, and fourth is communion, then fifth is insight, seeing not just what is, but how it all fits together. Sixth density, unity and balance. What Ra says. Sixth density is the realm of unity, integration, and compassionate wisdom. In the raw material, Ra describes this stage as the full synthesis of love and wisdom, where polarities begin to dissolve, beings no longer see themselves as separate, and the illusion of duality fades. Positive and negative paths cannot both continue here. The service to self path must be abandoned or transformed. Social memory complexes become highly unified, often serving as guides or teachers to lower densities, just as Ra claims to do, as a sixth density social memory complex which emerged from the planet Venus. Personal reflection. To me, sixth density felt like a great convergence, where heart and mind no longer speak different languages but move as one. Not about choosing between compassion and clarity, but embodying both so completely that the tension between them disappears. I thought of stars that die in supernovas, releasing into the cosmos the very elements they spent their lives forging: carbon, iron, oxygen, gold. A final act of cosmic generosity. From this explosion, new worlds form, and the dance of polarity begins again in matter. In contrast, I thought of black holes, which pull everything inward. Some scientists theorize that black holes shred matter, or even birth entire new universes on the other side of their event horizons. One expands, one contracts. Both are transformations. Neither is good or bad. They are different expressions of the same mystery, energy exploring what it means to be. If first density is matter, second is life, third is identity, fourth is communion, and fifth is insight, then sixth is integration, becoming what you see, without needing to separate from any part of it. Seventh density, completion and return. What Ra says. Seventh density is the final stage before rejoining the one infinite creator. In the raw material, this is called the destiny of foreverness, a realm beyond polarity, identity, even memory. Here the journey nears its end. Beings prepare for complete dissolution into source, while still maintaining a presence of awareness. This density transcends service to self or others. It's a being itself, untouched by form, yet still participating in creation as a silent, radiant witness. Personal reflection. When I reflected on seventh density, I thought, if sixth density is the mirror that sees all things as one, then seventh is what lies behind the mirror, the stillness before reflection, the essence before becoming. It's not just the return to source, but the recognition that we never left. Following the metaphor of stars and black holes, I imagined this density as the silence after the supernova, the calm at the center of the black hole, where all distinctions collapse. The elements have scattered. The light has burst. The game has played itself out, and what remains is presence, pure, luminous, untouched, ready to begin again. Some physicists propose that our entire universe may exist inside a black hole. If so, then perhaps seventh density is the threshold where one universe ends and another begins, not as a break, but as a breath. Inhale, creation. Exhale, return. If first density is matter, second is life, third is identity, fourth is communion, fifth is insight, sixth is integration, then seventh is return, not departure, but the quiet remembrance that you were never anything but all of it, constantly rewiring, always. What I just shared, both Ra's descriptions of the densities and my own reflections on them, can feel like a lot. It might even sound abstract or overly complex at first, but let me invite you, once again, to set aside any focus on the form these ideas take and instead ask, what is the function behind each of these densities? That's the question that changed everything for me. It's how I began to integrate this framework into my therapeutic work, not as a belief system, but as a map of lived experience. This isn't just some distant spiritual concept. It's something unfolding right here, right now. Let me show you what I mean in the life of a composite client I once had the privilege to walk with. Rhea's densities. Rhea came to therapy because she couldn't stop apologizing. It looked and often felt like kindness on the surface. But beneath it was a survival loop, constantly taking its toll on Rhea's nervous system. Here's how her awareness of that loop unfolded across the densities, not as esoteric metaphor, but as lived physiology. First density, unconscious felt sense awareness. Rhea was born 6 weeks premature. Her first days were spent in an incubator, machines humming, wires attached, light, harsh and unyielding. Her system didn't have a language yet, but it had sensation, pressure, uncertainty. Breath was labor. Connection was unsure. This is first density, the elements trying to hold form. And in Rhea's case, that form came with tension. Second density, adaptation. As a child, Rhea became the peacemaker in her home, the sweet one, the one who made herself small to make others comfortable. There wasn't yet a fully formed I. There was only stimulus and response. She didn't choose this pattern, she became it. That's second density, adaptation without identity. Third density, awareness. One day, in session, mid-sentence, mid-apology, she paused, blinked. Wow, I really do that, don't I? That's third density, the birth of reflection, awareness of the pattern, and with it, shame, grief, questions, the I emerging not as clarity, but as ache. But she stayed. She got curious, and she learned to ask a new question, not what's wrong with me, but what was this trying to do for me? That's how coherence begins. Fourth density, forgiveness. Then something softened. My parents weren't bad, she said, just overwhelmed. I don't hate that version of me anymore. I was just trying to stay connected. That's fourth density. Not just love, but love that includes the ache. Forgiveness not as erasure, but as depth. And from that forgiveness, the gift emerged. Rhea's over-apologizing was the distorted form of empathy, not a flaw, a function. She began to wield it, not reflexively, but relationally. Fifth density, wisdom. She started smiling when the pattern showed up now. There you are, she'd say. She'd no longer collapse into the reflex. She held it. She paused. She chose. She didn't try to fix others who apologized the way she once had. She simply saw them, held them, said, I get it. That's fifth density, perspective without superiority, holding pattern without becoming it. Sixth density, integration. I think I inherited this, she said one day. My mom did it. Her mom too. It's like my system believed shrinking was sacred. She didn't resent it. She honored it. Saw it as something ancestral, something once sacred, something no longer necessary. That's sixth density, when wisdom and love marry, when the personal story becomes part of the whole, when you forgive not just the pattern, but the lineage. Seventh density, return. Rhea didn't transcend. She didn't graduate. She just became more herself. Now when she catches the apology reflex, she doesn't spiral. She breathes. She smiles. Hi, I remember you. That's seventh density. Not escape, but return. Full circle. Integration without erasure. Awareness without anxiety. And I felt that same seventh density spiral myself, sitting across from clients who remind me of a younger version of myself, someone caught in the reflexes of pride, of needing to prove, of believing they're better than the ones they love because that's how they learn to feel safe. But instead of judging them, I breathe, I remember, I smile, I get it. That's the return. Not rising above, but circling back with softer eyes. That's the moment I know. We're not broken, we're rewiring. David Hawkins and the Spiral of Feeling. If the raw material offers us densities as a kind of cosmic roadmap, a symbolic model for how consciousness evolves across lifetimes and dimensions, then Dr. David R. Hawkins offers us a mirror for what evolution feels like on the inside. His work focuses not on what lies beyond this incarnation, but on what it takes to heal and grow within it. Where Ra outlines the densities of spiritual development, Hawkins maps the emotional frequencies we pass through as we become more attuned to the internal coherence of our mind-body-spirit system. Dr. David R. Hawkins, MD, PhD, was a trailblazing psychiatrist, consciousness researcher, and spiritual teacher whose career spanned over 5 decades. He co-authored Orthomolecular Psychiatry with Nobel laureate Linus Pauling, directed a large-scale mental health center in New York, and treated thousands of patients. He also earned recognition as a court-appointed expert in psychiatry and held advanced degrees in both medicine and philosophy. But his most influential and most debated contribution is the map of consciousness, a calibrated scale that ranks human emotional and spiritual states along a logarithmic spectrum from 0 to 1,000. The map begins at the lowest, most contracted states. Shame, 20. Guilt, 30. Apathy, 50. Grief, 75. And fear, 100. These are survival states. They close us off, restrict our energy, and collapse our sense of self. As the scale rises, it moves through slightly more activated emotions like desire, 125, anger, 150, and pride, 175. These are still rooted in ego and reactivity, but they contain more charge, more motion. Then comes the inflection point, courage, 200. According to Hawkins, this is the threshold where the upward spiral begins. From here, we move into neutrality, 250, willingness, 310, acceptance, 350, love, 500, joy, 540, peace, 600, and ultimately, enlightenment, 700 to 1,000. When I first learned about this model, I started to think of those numbers as a kind of internal thermostat, a simple but powerful way to check in with myself, not to diagnose or judge, but to notice. What am I feeling right now? Am I in pride, 175? What does that feel like in my body? Am I burning with anger, 150? Collapsing in shame, 20? At first, I saw the lower numbers as problems to fix, as enemies to defeat. I'd notice I was in anger or fear and immediately try to get rid of it. But over time, I realized that trying to eliminate the feeling only made it stronger. Or worse, it buried it, deep down, where it would ferment into something sharper. I've learned that pushing feelings away, especially the so-called negative ones, is often just another form of shame. It's starting over at the bottom of the scale. It's internalized self-rejection. And I've gotten good at that over the years. Too good. It's a survival skill, yes, a way to stay functional in high-control environments. But it's also what has kept me distant from others and from myself. The shift happened when I stopped trying to get rid of emotions and started listening to them. When I started to ask, what are you trying to protect? What do you want me to know? That was the real beginning of integration. That's what courage, 200, looked like for me. Not charging forward, but staying present, feeling the feeling, holding space for it instead of condemning it. And in that space, the spiral opened. This is the same turning point that Hawkins marked on his scale, and it's not unlike the shift Ra describes from 3rd to 4th density, from the struggle of individual ego to the emergence of relational awareness, from control to connection, from fear to love. I've seen this shift in clients, in loved ones, and in my own nervous system. It's what happens when someone moves from defending their behavior with certainty to exploring its origins with curiosity. When they stop performing and start feeling, that's the moment growth begins, not as an abstract idea, but as a somatic truth. What I find so helpful and so beautifully resonant with the concept of densities is that Hawkins didn't present emotional states as permanent fixtures. They're not who we are. They're not signs of brokenness. They're motion. You can move from shame, 20, to pride, 175, to courage, 200, to love, 500, in a single afternoon. And you can do it all over again the next day. I've done it. I've watched others do it. And it's rarely neat. It spirals. It loops. It returns. But when you start to stabilize in those higher frequencies, when acceptance, 350, becomes more familiar than judgment, when love, 500, becomes a reflex rather than a reward, you don't float away into spiritual bliss. You become grounded. You become safe. You start co-regulating others just by being present. That's not just personal healing. That's planetary evolution. That's density shift in real time. And the language of frequency isn't just poetic. It's physiological. Shame feels like collapse. Acceptance feels like expansion. Love brings coherence. These aren't just abstract qualities. They show up in your vagus nerve, in your cortisol levels, in your breath patterns. Polyvagal theory shows us that nervous systems regulate through safety and connection. Epigenetics shows us that our internal environment can turn genes on or off. Interpersonal neurobiology shows us that presence is medicine. So even if you don't buy Hawkins' use of muscle testing or numeral calibration, the pattern he maps is real. You feel it. And that's the most important part. These ideas only matter if they move us, if they help us sit with pain instead of spinning away from it, if they help us respond to others with spaciousness instead of shame, if they help us recognize our shadow not as a defect, but as a doorway, a foothold to the next step in the spiral. I've had to return to this again and again, especially around pride, 175. Earlier, I shared how being a rule-following Mormon kid gave me a sense of superiority. But that pride was never about feeling better. It was about feeling safe. In a system that measured worth by obedience, my pride was a shield. It kept me from feeling different, uncertain, or vulnerable. But it also kept me disconnected. It numbed my joy. That's the thing about pride. It's brittle. It can't bear too much closeness. It deflects intimacy. It's constantly comparing, constantly competing. It holds people at arm's length, even when what you want most is to be held. So, I've had to unlearn it. I've had to rewire. I've had to feel what's underneath it. And I still catch myself judging, especially when someone reflects a part of me I've tried to disown. But now, more often, I notice it sooner. I pause. I breathe. I soften. I listen. That's the spiral. That's the return. That's seventh density in the microcosm. That's the moment when pride becomes a portal instead of a prison. What Hawkins ultimately taught me is that every emotional state is a direction of motion. Shame, 20, implodes. Anger, 150, erupts. Courage, 200, expands. Love, 500, opens. Enlightenment, 700 plus, dissolves. Emotion is motion. Consciousness moves. And the more we learn to sense that movement, not just in ourselves, but in others, the more we trust the process. We stop chasing perfection. We stop clinging to any one state. We start honoring momentum. That's how we hold the spiral. That's how we honor the map. That's how we become the shift. The spiral revisited. Look how far we've come. Chapter 1. The ache that didn't make sense. First density tension. Chapter 2. The tip of whimsy. Your flicker of movement inside the form. Chapter 3. Mind, body, spirit. Fractured, waiting to retune. Chapter 4. Pain as signal, not malfunction. Chapter 5, Control as a Survival Loop. Chapter 6, Polarity as Soul Orientation, Service to Self or Other. Chapters 7, 8, and 9, Ra, Seth, Gene Keys, Language for the Pattern. Chapters 10, 11, 12, The Science Beneath the Symbols. You weren't just passively receiving it, you were actively absorbing it. Your nervous system working then and now, expertly, beneath your awareness, to create meaning and coherence in whatever ways it has learned to do so in order to keep you safe. In Part 2, I have highlighted some of my own shameful life experiences to illustrate these ideas. I started this section by asking, is it just me, or do the things that once embarrassed you most sometimes come back as your greatest teachers? And now, before moving into Part 3, it's time for me to show you more fully what I mean. To come out of the closet, if I may. Even if that makes this chapter the longest and most imbalanced chapter in the book. It's all going to be okay. I've learned to trust in coherence. The solar spiral and the power to transform. As has been suggested in the raw material, if Venus can become a social memory complex, what about Earth? What about Jupiter, Mars? If planets are beings, fields of evolving intelligence, then maybe stars are too. And if each density builds upon the one before it, then perhaps the next octave of consciousness is already stirring in the very heart of our solar system. Could the sun itself become a social memory complex? Could it one day hold the relational coherence of every planet, every moon, every life that ever flickered within its gravitational care? That question stirred something in me. It pulled me into silence, into sound, into practice. For years, I had been listening to channelers. Ra, Seth, A Course in Miracles, Abraham, Bashar, Wendy Kennedy and the Ninth Dimensional Pleiadians. Messages from collectives, councils, higher selves. Some felt grounded. Some felt fantastical. But all of them made me wonder, could I do this too? Not to prove anything, not to predict anything, but to explore, to rewire, to play. So, one night, I stepped into a closet. I brought a crystal bowl and I played a single resonant note. I let it ring while I opened my mouth to speak, to sing. Not as myself exactly, but as a voice I imagined could emerge through me from a solar system more evolved than our own. I imagined Arcturus, not necessarily the star itself, but the collective intelligence potentially within it. I called it, quite playfully, the Arcturian collective thingy. And as I stood there, absorbed in the sound, from somewhere between my breath and my spine, this came through.
There is a power within you.
There is a power within you.
Power within you.
are using it right now.
And you are using it right now.
You cannot help but use it now.
You cannot help but use it now.
It is the power of transformation.
You have the power of transformation.
Waves of light,
Waves of light,
ripples of sound.
ripples of sound.
You transform them in your mind.
You transform them in your mind,
In your heart.
in your heart.
The words you speak,
The words you speak,
the words you hear,
the words you hear.
you transform them into something
You transform them into something
that feels so real.
that feels so real.
What is real?
What is real?
It is your creation.
It is your creation.
The power to transform.
The power to transform.
That is what you are.
It is what you are.
That moment changed something. Not because I believed everything about it literally, but because I recognized something. These were my beliefs. They were my values. When I stripped everything away and thought, what would the Arcturian collective thingy say to me right here, right now, if they could say anything at all? That was it. Over the next 3 years, I recorded dozens of these transmissions. I did them alone, in meditation. I did them with the intention of rewiring my own nervous system, to give voice to ideas I had encountered in Ra, in Seth, in the Gene Keys, and to hear them reflected back in my own voice, spoken in rhythm, encoded in story, fired and wired into being. Sometimes I spoke as Omra of the High Council, an intermediary I invented to give structure to the message. Sometimes I sounded like Alan Watts crossed with George Harrison crossed with Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was absurd and awkward and beautiful and healing. And it still is. Because that playground, the Arcturian playground, became the place where so much of this book began to emerge. Leonardo Determinist Vinci, the tip of whimsy, the neuron as the pearl of Mother Earth, the 7-layer burrito of existence, wait for it, humans as the neurons of a waking planet's nervous system, and so much more. I would record them and publish them on a podcast called, of course, The Arcturian Playground, which some people found, but I never promoted. I never edited or corrected anything I said. I just published them, often without even listening back until it was out in the public realm. And each time I did this, listening back to my own stream of consciousness, swift, 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 yawn, It felt like another layer of shame, guilt, fear, and pride dissolving away. But into what? What gave me permission to keep going, even when I felt silly or delusional or worried what others would think, was this opening line that came through early on when I paused and asked, "Is this too weird?" The response was immediate.
Welcome to the Arcturian Playground, a place to play in the realm of imagination, all done in the service of compassionate expansion of consciousness. Yes, it sounds weird, we know. We would not have it any other way.
Welcome to the Arcturian Playground, a place to play in the realm of imagination, all done in the service of compassionate expansion of consciousness. Yes, it sounds weird, we know. We would not have it any other way. That was the moment I let go of the need to justify, to defend. I owned the weird. I owned the fiction. I frequently reminded myself, I am the man in the chair. I'm making this up. But that doesn't mean it's not real. Because what is a fiction anyway? What is channeling? Where do ideas actually come from? Is it the soul, the subconscious, the nervous system? Is it archetype, ancestry, field resonance, neuroelectric improvisation, stardust with a pulse? I don't know, but I know what it did. It rewired me. It reshaped my inner voice. It taught me how to speak from coherence, not control. To imagine not just as escape, but as integration. To treat the sacred not as fact, but as frequency. It swift at my deeply encrusted layers of pride. Richard Rudd describes pride as a brilliant disguise for shame, a compensatory inflation that masks an invisible contraction. It's clever. It makes you feel powerful while keeping you safely guarded from the tenderness you don't want to feel. But beneath that pride is a deep vulnerability, a longing to be seen, to be enough, to be accepted. And when you allow yourself to meet that ache instead of armor against it, the gift of acceptance begins to stir. That's the shift. Not from pride into submission, but from pride into presence. You don't collapse, you relax. You stop needing to lead the room and instead start listening to what's alive in it already. That's how client-centered therapy works. That's how it feels. When I sit with someone now, I try to meet them with unconditional positive regard. Not because I'm performing empathy, but because I've practiced meeting those same parts in myself. The scared ones, the guarded ones, the ones that used to need to be better, smarter, right. It doesn't mean I'm always there. I still get caught, pulled into emotion, sidetracked by ego. But more and more often, I return. I remember. I feel that rewiring in real time, and the more I help others stabilize in that space, the more I stay there too. That's the gift of this work, the return. Not just to acceptance, but toward what the Gene Keys call the city of universal love, a state beyond separation, beyond transaction, a field that includes the wound, the watcher, and the wisdom all at once. I'm not claiming to live there, but I feel it flicker. I know my way back now. I've learned to love the rewiring, not just as a personal healing arc, but as a rhythm for living, a way of walking with others while still walking myself. So if this chapter has felt like a culmination of therapy, of science, of shadow work, of vibration, it's also a confession. I'm not just a nervous system analyst, or a trauma-informed therapist, or a scientifically curious ex-Mormon exploring metaphor. I'm a man who went into a closet and channeled fictional aliens to remember how to feel. to remember how to play, to remember how to trust the spiral. Because I'm not broken, I'm rewiring, and so are you, always.
Thank you for playing with us today in the Arcturian playground. Do not for a minute think that your exploration is finished. Carry us with you and invite the spirit of compassion and love into your lives. Nothing is more important or more fulfilling. Create compassion and love within your own hearts and minds. Then share it with all around you. Yes, it sounds weird. We know. We would not have it any other way.